culture, it's complicated. Very few people can actually describe it. It's tricky. And so therefore it feels very soft. And so people are like, oh, culture, it's soft. We're about results. Well, culture is your strategy if you do it well. And it is what fuels your results. And there's nothing soft to it. It's very strategic. Can the company operate when the leadership changes? Or do we need certain, continue with this leadership bench, but maybe the founder steps outside or the previous owner steps outside the organization? Those are when the deals fall apart. Because when they get down in there and they look at what does that leadership team look like and how do they, can they work and operate without that founder? It's not just having a big dashboard of a million different KPIs that you're reading every day. It's like, what's it telling us? And let's do something about it.
Yeah.
Let's fix it. And then let's hone in on the top 3 or the top 5 that are going to move the needle, know what those are, and work on those.
Jamie Petter runs Culture Grade HR and works as a fractional chief people officer. She gets called in when a company is about to scale or sell and the thing nobody wrote down starts to crack, the culture. On this episode of Pulse by HRBench, Jamie makes the case that culture is a strategy, not soft stuff. She walks through the grid she uses to define it before a deal, why so many acquisitions break on the people side, and how to find the few numbers that tell you it's working. If culture has ever been waved off as too soft to measure, this one hands you the argument. Let's get into this episode. I'm here with Jamie Petter. Jamie, is there anything you would like the audience to know about you and Culture Grade HR and kind of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. I operate as a founder of Culture Grade HR, also as a fractional chief people officer. So I help small to medium-sized businesses with their people, and I take either HR kind of completely off their plate if they're a smaller organization, or I help them really build the systems that they need to drive results through people.
Great. Awesome. Well, in the name of the company, we're going to talk a little bit about culture. And we were kind of shooting the breeze before this about kind of some of the culture initiatives you're hearing. And I want to kick it off, but I'm going to start with a story because on a previous episode, I wanted to use this story and I didn't find a place to do it. And I'm a huge Oakland A's fan. Well, they're going to be the Las Vegas A's, which is unfortunate. And they're currently in my hometown, Sacramento. But they had this, like, I don't know if it's an actual story, Jamie, but I always use it as a story for culture. And back in like 2014, they were the hottest team in baseball and they had a player on the team, Giannis Cespedes. And I've written about this trade and I was in the stands with my wife and I looked at her and I was like, this is their year. They're going. They would do these walk-offs, like they would end the game with home runs. Every team talked about how they were worried about the A's going into the bottom of the ninth at home because they're like, we could lose the game. We could be down 4 runs. We could be up 4 runs and lose it. And after I said that in the stands, like a week later, they had a blockbuster trade and traded Giannis Cespedes and to get a starting pitcher, which they needed a starting pitcher to be able to make a run in the playoffs. But what ended up happening with that particular trade is they became the worst team in baseball. Like the second half of the season, it wasn't even the second half. It was like the last 2 months of the season. They became the worst team in baseball. They scraped into the playoffs and lost in a wild card game. And I would watch and listen to every game after that trade. And it was awful. And basically it broke the morale of the locker room. Like there's this culture piece and it just absolutely decimated it because he was a foundation to the organization. And it was a very depressing moment for me having to go through that. But such is being an Oakland, Oakland has no sports now, but being a Raiders A's fan.
They didn't want to take a chance again.
I guess they lost all their team. But
yeah,
I want to talk about like, that's kind of the precursor. So sorry for the audience if you don't like sports analogies, but I love that one so much.
I love that you brought that up, actually.
Yeah. I want to talk about like culture, especially in M&A and how company culture can go through these same processes. Cause that's kind of like one of the big things that you're interested in, when we were talking about doing this episode. And so I just want to leave it there. Like, how do you think about culture in companies as they're growing and scaling?
Yeah. Well, I love your baseball analogy because sometimes we miss who our culture influencers are.
Yeah.
And it's really, really critical when we're looking at an organization and we're we're looking at what their culture advantage is. And we tend to think, oh, it's probably the whole team or it's the leadership. It's always a combination of the players and the leadership and the coaches, right? That get championships won. But they're deep rooted into our cultures are those that really activate. They're spokespeople for it. They're champions of culture. And when you're working in an organization, understanding who those players are really, really critical to your success or your failure.
Yeah. So like if you're getting ready to go through an M&A, how because you hear about it all the time, like companies that get acquired, or you end up having maybe like three companies get bundled together in an acquisition and then they all
Mhm.
operate as three different companies. Like, how do you
Mm,
start thinking
mhm.
about those influencers that you're the culture influencers that you mentioned through kind of that acquisition process so that you can not have one company has to get rid of their culture, but you can kind of mesh into that so that you can produce the results that you want.
Yeah. I think those companies that do it right and do it
Yeah.
well, from the outside, they're really answering the question: are we adding a company to our portfolio that
Yeah.
makes us stronger, or are we merging cultures together? Are we bringing them in because they align with our culture? Or are we adding them because they're strong on their own and we
Mhm.
want them to continue that culture? And I think that's what's really important is understanding what you're working with first in that scenario. And it's different with different scenarios. But those companies that you might have a portfolio, private equity company that have a portfolio of brands, they really are respectful to what's inside that culture, how do they operate and reading into that and not really messing with that. It's staying up here and saying, here's our overarching goals. Here's what we're trying to achieve. And how do we support you as a brand in our portfolio and allowing that culture to continue to thrive. I think it's when you're merging the organizations together or you're acquiring. So you're building and scaling through acquisition that's a little trickier.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a bit of research and data to suggest that like a lot of PE deals end up failing because of the culture integration portion of it. I want to say it's like 90% of them have some kind of issue there, and it's
Mhm.
always historically been a little overlooked. Like I know for us, HRBench, like we see it now more and more. Like you have things like the good job score. Like I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a PwC or Gartner thing. I'm probably
Mhm.
I'll have to go back and check who did it, but they're like starting to think at the forefront a little bit more about that.
Mhm. Yeah. I think, if you're not when you're acquiring a company and you're looking at the measurements and the data, like what is it telling you? Is this a healthy organization? Is
Yeah.
culture fueling the results? And that's what's like super critical. So if they're hitting their results and they have a fantastic product, then you're going down deeper to the next level. What does that leadership bench look like? And is the company operating? Can the company operate when the leadership changes, or do we need certain, continue with this leadership bench, but maybe the founder steps outside or the previous owner steps outside the organization? Those are when the deals fall apart. Is when they
Yeah.
get down in there and they look at what does that leadership team look like and how do they can they work and operate without that founder? And then what are the systems in place? How do they actually get work done? And how do they produce those results? That needs to be really strong. And that's when companies bring me in. I'm talking to a company right now that's challenged with a similar situation that maybe a sale didn't go through before a couple years ago because
Yeah.
those components weren't strong enough. So they're not attractive enough. So companies that are looking to sell or buy are both looking at the same thing. Do I have the infrastructure, the systems in place to drive the results? Does my culture enable that? Do I have the right leadership team to do it?
Yeah, and you have a system for that, kind of like walking through how you define culture before those things
Hmm.
happen, right?
Yeah.
You like look
Yeah.
at it as a grid. Like you want to walk us through the grid?
The culture grid. Well, culture it's complicated. Very few people can actually describe it, right? Like
Yeah.
what is your culture? And it's tricky. And so therefore it feels very soft. And so people are like, "Oh, culture. It's soft. We're about results." Well, culture is your strategy if you do it well. And it is what fuels your results. And there's nothing soft to it. It's very strategic. It's, if you look at the foundation of all great cultures, I like to say it's like the heart of the grid in the
Hmm.
center, and you're looking simply at purpose, product, and people. So in a nutshell, when I look at and all of that, the heartbeat of that heart is trust.
Yeah.
So if I have a compelling purpose, it gets my people out of bed every day. It strives me to perform and do what I do. And it's the why, right? And then my product is, do I have a great product? Is my product, whether it's sale, I'm selling my product as a service or I have a product. It's what does my product do? Is it spectacular? Builds pride
Hmm.
in the company and the people that work for it? And then do I have the people that are able to, are their mindsets, their behaviors, their beliefs, their skills, are they aligned to delivering that purpose? And that's where you start. And you take a look at that. And then you go into the data and you say, are we performing in a way that shows us that we have a strong purpose, people, and product? And then there's quite a few steps after that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you talked about, the culture. Like a lot of times people think culture is, soft, or like culture, like our culture is delivering results. Like in our A's example, one of the
Hmm.
things that was their culture, like they had the whole Moneyball era. They were a low budget team. It was about players at two ends. Like if I were to sum up their culture, now I wasn't ever in the locker room or anything, but just watching, it was players at two ends of their careers, at the very start and at the very end, that they said, we're just going to go to Oakland and have a ton of fun and hit a bunch of home runs. And that's what they did. And they would throw, like, every time they would walk off, they would do pies. They would throw pies in people's faces while they were doing their post game interviews. And so they'd be with the news reporters. Like that was what they did. Like it wasn't like any kind of initiative that the coaches did. It organically grew. And I'm probably going to use this example twice in this episode, but there's a book I really like, The 9 Lies We Tell Ourselves at Work, or 9 Lies at Work. I don't know if you've read it. And they have an example in there about people don't leave companies and people don't leave managers. So we say people leave managers. They're making the argument that that's not true. People leave or stay because of teams. And one of the studies they did in there was a Cisco location in Poland, and the people stuck around because the culture of the particular team that had longevity was they ate lunch every day together. Like that was that
Yeah.
team's culture. No
Hmm.
initiative, no, but you can foster that kind of stuff, right? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and then it ends up breeding results. Like, so the idea that culture is fluffy or programs isn't always, I think, always the case.
Yeah. And I would say in both the pie in the face
Yeah,
and the team that gets together and has lunch, what I would call that is a process or a system in which we celebrate, recognize people, individuals. So that is the
exactly. Yeah.
way in their culture they celebrated was throwing a pie in the face. The
Yep.
same as Zappos is a great company example of how they celebrate their employees, and they do a parade around their office, and culture is really important to that. And those are the practices and behaviors that help you operationalize your culture. So
Yeah.
it's very rarely one thing, but if the team feels like they have lunch together, that becomes part of their cultural DNA, so to speak. And that's what's memorable. And that's what creates collaboration. Same as Google, working for Google, work for their food program and hospitality. Their
Yeah.
food program was invented, that great benefit that they do for their employees was all created because of lunch conversations with
Yeah.
leaders that would get them out of their offices and silos and into having lunch together where they created Gmail.
Yeah.
And so that is became their recipe for we need to make sure we create great cafes and great experiences where people want to come and gather for food so that they can inspire each other with ideas. And that is definitely, that's a great example of culture.
Yeah, I love that example. I didn't know that that's why they started their food program, but it makes so much sense, and it really is, that's a great example. So, you talked about your process for culture, and I just want to touch on like as you're going through an acquisition or scaling or growing, like what points do you start to see culture, or like a founder's original idea of culture or a business's original idea start to break as they scale or get acquired?
Mhm. Yeah. And that's where it gets tricky, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's where that grid continues to expand out. So if you have a strong purpose, product, and your people are strong, and now I'm going to grow and scale, there's some components that absolutely need to be in play in order
Mhm.
to do that effectively. And I think this is where our smaller organization, 20, 50, even maybe 100 employees really need to pay attention to so that their results continue to happen. And that is, really defining, so I'd say it's about defining the culture and making sure we are really clear on the values and behaviors, what it looks like in action, what are the mindsets of our people. And we put those into written documents. We use success profiles, is what we would call it in the HR business, where a clear expectation of what right looks like. It's documented. We see the competencies, we see the behaviors, and we see the expectations. And then we know that's what we're looking for. It's all documented. And then
Mhm.
how do I take our documented what makes our secret sauce or our culture advantage? And then how do I start to communicate that? And I make sure I scale that through my onboarding programs, how I teach and train, and the consistency in that experience is carried out is it measured? Are we measuring it every day? Are we communicating it? And are we operationalizing it? So, do our systems enable us to live out that culture consistently every day? And the
Yeah.
larger you get, the more incredibly important your leadership is, because that's where either the processes start to break down because how we operated as a small company is not sustainable in a large company to achieve the same goal. We got to change it up a little bit and we need to make sure we fix it before we break it. And then leadership needs to model it, be supportive of it, and drive the accountability of it. Because that's as you start to scale, your perception of an organization is usually closely tied to the manager and leadership that you encounter every day, not the actual company.
Yeah. So as you're trying to figure out, I, I mean, I would imagine business leaders, especially in 50 to 100-person companies, kind of have a sense of what the culture is. But in order to document it, do you is there like a program to like try and figure out and synthesize what that is so that during that scaling or a sale they can articulate it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going in and really working with the leadership team and the right folks from the team to come in and really articulate what it is that our values are. They might have them already documented, but do they have them in a way that is easy to see what those behaviors are? Like, how
Hmm.
do you show up every day with trust? What does trust look like, for example? And making sure that you can clearly see what that value and action looks like and making sure you document that. And then if we want to deliver this amazing service level or this customer experience, well, then having a systemized approach, what does that look like from beginning to end? Making sure that those processes are clearly documented. And then how do we train to make sure that our people get it, they connect to it, they understand it, and that we can hold them accountable to that. So yeah, there's lots of ways to do that. And I think insights and data help us with starting points to see how effective that.
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump around a little bit because I like how you talked about leaders getting involved in the culture piece and being part of that whole strategy. And rather
Mhm.
than leaving, like our question was like to kind of chat through was instead of letting HR or a department lead the people strategy, like having
Yeah,
leadership be involved in that. And I think
absolutely.
that's such a key piece because sometimes people may say like, "Oh, we're gonna hire this out," like the attraction of talent or things like that. But you think of like companies with strong leaders, I bet you they have people knocking out their door to come work for them. Like, I mean, everybody uses Steve Jobs as an example. Like,
Mhm,
some people right now would probably look at Anthropic and be like, "Oh yeah, Anthropic's probably got like their leader, they're probably have huge demand for attraction. Their leaders are all involved in it."
mhm.
Like, how do you think about helping leadership get involved in the people strategy rather than delegating everything to HR?
Yeah. Well, the people strategy won't work if it's
Yeah.
only delegated to HR. And I think, that's what's so critical is that culture and people are integrated into and what help drive the strategy. So when we think about the ownership of culture, there is an HR ownership. And sometimes it's like the HR will take care of that. Well, HR components are a piece of that. They help. we help with the processes, we help make sure the systems are in place, we help build kind of the tools and resources that might be needed. And then leadership leading own how they model that culture, how they live it day in, day out, how they hold people accountable to that. How are they building trust every day with their people? And employees own that with the practices and how they participate and contribute. So culture won't ever work to fuel your results unless it's a full collaborative force with people, leaders, and HR support on that. And when you look at what defines a great culture, there's two perspectives, and Great Place to Work Institute has done amazing research on this, and they are the gold standard of what great place to look like. But, from an employee standpoint, if I have pride in what I do and I trust the relationship I have with my leader and managers, and I have good camaraderie with the people that I work with, then I define that as a great place to work. And
Yeah.
when you look at from a leader standpoint, leaders look at it as I want to work in a company that hits their targets and goals, right? Because they're responsible for that with people that give their personal best every day. They
Uh-huh.
give their maximum best, all in an environment as a team. And when you put those two together, the common denominator is trust, credibility, fairness, accountability. Those are the things that help drive culture. And that everyone owns that. It's not an HR initiative.
Yeah, and it's probably a very difficult thing right now because I think trust and engagement is hitting a pretty big low at the moment for companies. I mean, you see it
All
all over
time.
headlines.
Hmm.
So that's
Yep.
gotta be a very tricky thing that I would hope is on
Yep.
leaders' minds, right?
I would hope. And I think again, trust is difficult for people to wrap their head around. And that's, confusing because do you I mean, when your culture is feeling results, you feel it, you can see it. Where you see it is your customers. Your customers trust you. They use you again. They talk about you and promote you. So your sales grow. And not only does that, but then when your people trust you, then they talk about you and they promote you. And now you're attracting top talent and you're attracting more customers. So, and it all surfaces back to trust. And
Yeah.
so are we, do we have the analytics in play to tell us what's going on our trust level? And we look at that in different ways. We could look at it in retention. We could look at it in exit interviews. We can look at pulse checks and are we, asking right survey engagement questions that are getting to the perceptions of our employees and then the perceptions of our customers, not just internal, but what are our customers saying about us? And when our customers are often can give us an indication that maybe our sales process is broken. Maybe we're too pushy. Maybe we're doing this incorrectly. Maybe we're not empowering our people to deliver the customer experience at the moment they're there rather than having us solve it after they leave the store, so to speak. But those are all big important measures. What's my customer saying? What's my employee saying? And then what's the deeper analytics from the HR space that we can use to give us insight?
Yeah, I like how you referenced that customers can be an indication of the company's culture. Read a book years ago. I want to say it's the Breaking the Customer Value Chain, but I'm not entirely positive. And they were using the culture and things within companies. And one of the examples was Comcast. Or Xfinity now, and how their culture was
Hmm.
pretty, or maybe it was DirecTV. It was one of those. I want to say it was Comcast. I'm gonna go with Comcast, but basically their
One of
NPS
them.
score and their people wanting to do business with them was so low that the IRS actually rated higher than they did. So people would rather pay their taxes than work with Comcast, which is wild. I think that
Hmm.
that you had done so much. And so looking at that, I
Yeah.
don't know if they ever made if they cared or not. The book didn't go
Yeah.
into that, but it's just a wild
but it's a
example.
but it's true. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about that, sometimes it's the person that you're talking to on the phone when you're trying to troubleshoot, your television or your internet or your whatever that speed is that you're trying to get enhanced. But most likely, it's the processes
Hmm.
in which on the back end that are making that person answer the question that way, and that's what's dangerous. I mean, so and then your people, if you get the right people with the right initiative and then you empower them and give them the right tools to deliver service, you should see that in your service records. You should see that. And when you have your sales go down, your service net promoter score goes down, there's probably a problem somewhere in
Yeah.
your delivery.
So the other piece I wanted to touch on is in this was you had mentioned a little bit as we were going through talking about leaders, but how leaders are attracting talents and how you get leaders to start attracting talent. Like maybe they don't view that as part of their job or they're not born to, as they talk to people, oh, come work with us kind of stuff. Like, how do you think about that and coach? Maybe it's not just a COO, but it's a regional director or a store manager to
Mhm.
take that upon themselves.
Yeah. Well, in those environments, I think it's a little bit easier
Yeah.
because maybe it's just a symptom of what their job requires them to do. But if you lead people, you're expected to recruit talent.
Hmm.
And those that do it well are already attracting talent themselves, right?
Yeah.
They're going out there. They're a magnet for talent because they're inspiring and they want great people on their team. A players attract A players. And so most leaders know that. And so I think what you're looking at is, are we attracting top talent? And then you're looking at, okay, so if we're not, what's our problem? Are we just not showcasing and exploiting the great culture that we have? Are we not messaging our employee and our brand well enough to attract talent? That's one layer. And the second is our leadership not strong enough? Do people not want to come here and follow these leaders? Are they inspired? What does our leadership look like? And is it attracting the customer or the employee that we're looking for? So it's absolutely critical. I mean, leaders are the number one talent magnet of your organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And the second time I wanted to use the 9 lies at work example was on the leadership piece
Hmm.
and gaining followers, and is the leader somebody that you want to follow? And one of the arguments they make in the book is they're a little provocative and say leadership's not a thing, but they go in and talk about how great leaders tend to be polarizing because they have a point of view, and then that point of view attracts people that have that type of point of view. And they use examples like Martin Luther King and those types
Hmm.
of folks that then gain these big followings and make change happen.
Yeah. And I
So,
and I think what is interesting is what I think your first comment was, that did they not believe that it was necessarily all that leadership could happen anywhere in the organization or any leadership? Or was it more point that it's, you definitely know who the leader is and you're following them?
their point was just that like leadership is like this like formal program isn't necessarily a
Mm,
thing, and that leadership can happen
correct.
anywhere and any person
Yeah.
can grab a following and become a leader. And it's not this like enigma that like, it's yes, you can coach it and all of that, but it's not
Yeah.
a formal, like the lie at work is that leadership is a formalized program, whereas
Mm,
that's what we
mhm.
tell ourselves, whereas they're saying anybody can organically become a leader. Like
Yeah.
nobody
Yeah. I
formalized like Martin Luther King Jr. into being a leader, right?
Right. I think 2 things can be true at the
Yeah.
same time. So I think, 1, yes, anyone has the capability of being a leader. Naturally, some of us have some of the skills that
Yeah.
tend to make us better leaders innately, but the statistics would tell us otherwise. Statistics would tell us that leadership is learned,
Yes.
trained, and developed. Because why would we promote so many individual contributors in our organizations over time and then they struggle
Hmm.
because they don't know the right way to lead in that manner. They haven't been given the skills. So what makes a great individual contributor in an organization not necessarily is going to make a great leader, because I have
Yeah.
to practice and use different skill sets. And that's what usually is the hang up. But, when you're speaking about the charisma, leadership comes in all packages,
Yes.
right? So it's not those that are just most charismatic, because sometimes charismatic leads to being ingenuine and not a good listener. And so we know that the best leaders out there are ones that have empathy, that listen to their people, and then they know how to motivate, inspire because they heard you. And then and that goes a long way. And so it's not necessarily the charisma that makes you a great leader, but it's people that feel like they're being lifted up by their leader,
Hmm.
supported and empowered by their leader. and held accountable, but that's a two-way, two-way job, but that's what leadership feels like.
Yeah, and I really like that you mentioned the individual contributor track of like, because that seemed to be it's not we've I think businesses have changed their opinion on that now, but it was like you did great at your individual contributor job, now you're going to be a leader and a manager. And it was like
Yeah.
that was like the reward, and it is different skill sets like you mentioned. One
Mhm.
is doing the skills of the job, the other is leading and people management and a whole slew of other things, and they're not necessarily related. And
Yeah.
the on track to more responsibility and better things at a company probably doesn't need. I think people have come to the realization that it doesn't have to be leadership.
Yeah. And I think what's tricky is especially in organizations of all sizes is how do now I have to lead. I'm going from we are on the team to me, but great leaders don't think about me. They think about we. And
Yeah.
so there's this disconnect between this transition where now I'm over here and the team's here. Well, yeah, but not really. You still have to get work done through the team. And sometimes you have to be a player coach.
Yeah.
And how do I balance that? And then what I find is that what leaders most struggle with is how do I have compelling conversations? How do I have inspiring coaching conversations? How do I deliver feedback continuously in a way that is constructive and not critical? So those, coaching, feedback, and then how do I hold people accountable where they see my authentic self? I'm genuine and transparent. Yet I know where that line is, that invisible, line is so that I create the environment and experience that is most helpful for my team. And I think those are the biggest things that leaders struggle with when they're making that jump.
Yeah. So I guess for those listening, we're now a little off topic, but I really like this conversation. So if you don't mind, like if you're becoming a first time manager, like what are some of
Mhm.
those things that you're thinking about helping them come up with like good constructive
Yeah.
feedback that's not critical? Like those are
Mhm.
so important. And first time managers, I think my opinion, I don't know if this is what everybody else thinks, sometimes get neglected on how to be really good at all of that.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, and it takes practice, and
yeah,
and leaders are not born in the classroom, right?
yeah.
We want to give them maybe a shot in the arm of the skills and
Mhm.
strategies, but it takes practice to do this. And I'd say that in building customized leadership development programs in my career, it starts with there's a formula, and it compiles of three main things. One is self-awareness and self-discovery. So I needed to be able to manage self before I can manage others. And then I need to understand business acumen. I need to understand how the business runs. I need to understand what the bigger picture is and how do I connect people to it. And then I need to understand some managing techniques like giving coaching, feedback. And those three components hold true as you continue to elevate your leadership role. But and then what percentage of time you spend in each one of those buckets varies based on entry level, first time manager, mid level, director level, and executive level, all of which is awareness, self awareness in other, psychometric tools, 360 feedback, whatever it is, that is critical because it's the aha moment that every manager has when they first step into leadership that other people don't think the same way they do.
Yeah.
It's the most surprising thing. You're like, really? Not everyone thinks that they should just keep working until blah, 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 right? And, so that awareness is really critical. And that's the first step. You got to be aware. And then you build the skills after that.
Yeah, those are 3 really great examples, kind of had a mentor tell me, "Know thyself." It came from a book and a program, I can't think of it
Yeah.
right now.
Uh,
But then the business acumen.
Socrates, I think it is. I think it's one of those
Yeah,
philosophers from long ago, which is awesome. Yeah.
yeah, and then business acumen, and I talk about this a lot on the show. Like, I've had most people on the show that we somehow touch upon this business acumen, and I was
Hmm.
just having a conversation, and I find it so funny that you bring this up, that it was, when I talk with HR folks and HR leaders, they always like we're having to justify HR to the business and our impact. I talk with marketers because I sit in marketing. We say the same thing. And I was joking
Hmm.
offhand with somebody. I was like, it seems that all departments maybe are just justifying their existence to finance and
Exactly,
learning the
right?
business acumen in order to do that. I say that tongue in cheek a little bit, but
Unfortunately, it's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
So I guess for everybody listening, you don't have to feel alone. Everybody's feeling this pain and learning
No,
the
we're all
business
fighting
acumen.
for, our impact. And I think that's the important part of why I approach HR from a lens of results, because at the end of the day, your people strategy your people are the way you're going to grow. Companies don't just grow by themselves. Technology might be helping them grow their right tech stack,
Yeah.
but it's the people that are putting the tech stack together that
Mhm.
are working in the organization that grow businesses. And I think we're always looking to show value. And it's tricky in some things are not easy to measure. Leadership development is not easy to measure. Sometimes those results that are most critical and important are hardest to measure. And so, we're always looking for how do I share value? And I think that's what's important about having analytics and being able to really align on when even if it's not a KPI, but we're aligned that when we see an increase in our customer service score, then we know that that's probably been a change in how our leaders are coming in and impacting the sale. And there's ways to get to those levels of learning and levels of talent development, specifically by behavior and observation, things like that. But data points and being able to tie in your value based on the results is critical to your survival.
Yeah, and it's 100% doable. And
Hmm.
it just takes sometimes a little bit of thinking. And I always, because in marketing we have the same thing, and in people analytics and all of this.
Hmm.
And I think about scientists in science, and they figure out how to measure all sorts of things to run studies. And if you can come up with ways to measure all of that, there's ways to measure all of this as well. It just takes some time and some finagling, and knowing that
Hmm.
there might not be a prescription right away
Yeah.
for a particular use case.
I think that's I love that you said that because what is challenging if you haven't worked with that organization before, you could throw a dart and say, well, we absolutely need to hear from the customer and we
Mhm.
have to hear from the employee and then we have to see what your sales are. I mean, if those aren't working, then we go down deeper and we figure out where they are. But getting to the right insights that are really moving the needle is important. So it's not just having a big dashboard of a million different KPIs that you're reading every day. It's like, what's it telling us? And let's do something about it. Like, let's fix it. And then let's hone in on the top three or the top five that are going to move the needle, know what those are, and work on those. Because, I've seen the complexity of organizations focusing on so many things that they don't know what the insights are that the data is providing them. And sometimes it needs let's just get more simple so that we can then get more complex as we dive deeper into the root cause of that data and what it's telling us.
Yeah, that's a good insight there. And those 3 to 5 that you're tracking can change over time depending on the initiatives as well, I think.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
you don't have to say like these are the
absolutely.
5 that are going to be here for all time.
Mm-mm, no. I mean, if you're in the retail world, yeah, I mean, you pretty much could say conversion of the customers that walk into your door is a pretty good indicator of what
Yeah,
we're doing with the sale. So that pretty much holds true. But if your selling process is about how we make that customer feel and how we build the relationship with them, then I probably need to be looking at some additional data to tell me if I'm going to get more traffic in the door because
yeah.
I'm doing what I need to do here, but I don't have the analytics to tell me that. So, some are obvious and some aren't.
Correct. It's a good call out. Well, Jamie, I appreciate the time. I want to be conscious of time here. Is there anything else you would like to leave the audience with that we didn't cover?
I think that I would just say that if whatever organization, if you're in a private equity, merger acquisition, small, medium business, to maybe just take a look at your people differently and say, is my culture fueling the results that I'm looking for? And if I'm not hitting results, why? And start really taking a deep dive into the systems and practices and policies that you have in play and the expectations. The people strategy is that three-legged stool. If you have your product strategy and you have your purpose and your financial strategy. Without that people strategy, that stool's going to be pretty wobbly. There aren't many two-legged stools out there. And so take a deeper look at your people strategy. And do you have the components you need to scale?
That is a really great way to close this out. Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Where would you like the audience to connect with you?
I'd love for them they can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
They can find me at Culture Grid HR is the only one. And Jamie Petter is the only one on LinkedIn. So you're sure to find me.
Great. We will put both of those into the show notes for everybody. And Jamie, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with us today. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. Thank you for having me. Great topics.
Good. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Pulse, the podcast that has real conversations with HR leaders linking people to performance. HRBench is the people analytics platform that turns HR data into business strategy. It connects to all your tools, HRIS, ATS, payroll, surveys, whatever you're using. In just a few clicks, you get over 45 metrics instantly visualized in boardroom-ready dashboards, benchmarked by industry and company size. Book a demo at HRBench.com and we'll build you a custom benchmark report using your data.